Welcome to Getting Better with Dr. Adam. Dr. Adam Silberstein is a clinical psychologist who has been working in the field since 1993. With a broad range of clinical experience, including state psychiatric hospitals, adolescent residential treatment with a trauma focus, the Department of Corrections, and in the addiction treatment arena. Adam is currently in private practice and serves as a clinical consultant and supervisor for a number of treatment centers. This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there is an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.
What an interesting conversation with Dr. Eric Proescher. Dr. Eric Proescher is a psychologist who works at the VA in Chicago. He also has a Master of Public Health from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And just an interesting thinker, willing to question basic assumptions. And we talked about the challenges of isolation and the challenges of mental health, especially now in this very, very difficult time. And we reviewed and really went into depth about his study on the value of perceived social network and the importance of community. In his work, he looks at the impact for vets who were deployed after 9/11 and the impact of social network on mental health, on quality of life, and on disability. And really unpack the value of having community and having support and a sense of support, and how, from his position, and certainly I agree, undoubtedly it's an essential, and it's that relationship is so critical to building resilience and healing. So please enjoy. What a great conversation with Dr. Eric Proescher. Here with Dr. Eric Proescher. Damn it. I just had a great 10 minutes of conversation, and I was wondering what was going on. It was in and out, and then I realized he was doing like some stretch exercises. He didn't realize we started. So I had a whole good rap going. I thought it was so organic, and it really was, but it didn't sound good because I didn't realize he was doing stretching. We're on the phone. I'm in LA and he's in Chicago. So we'll do this again. Welcome, Dr. Eric Proescher.
Well, thank you. Yes, it was organic because I thought we were just shooting just
you can say it. You can say it here.
Shooting shit.
Yes, I thought we were too, but we were flowing really well, but I have the strength to do this from the beginning again. So let's do this thing, and
let's do this. Let's go.
And just to recap, Dr. Eric Proescher is a psychologist in Chicago. He works for the VA, and he holds a master's in public health from the University of Chicago at Illinois. And we've been talking and really...
University of Illinois in Chicago, UIC.
What did I call it?
University of Chicago.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I don't want to upgrade you like that. I'm sorry. I've for those who know, Eric did not go to the University of Chicago. It's a bit above his station, but University of Illinois at Chicago sounds...
Whoa, easy. Are you nagging me on this already? No. By the way, UIC's public health program is ranked higher than... I don't even think University of Chicago has a public health program.
There you go. So, yes, this is a decorated psychologist who I'm so interested in talking to. And we go back a long way, very, very close friend of mine and colleague, and, has been a great inspiration in terms of his interests in his work over the years. And man, it's been a crazy several months, huh, Dr. Proescher?
It sure has, man. I mean, this is a unique and interesting time. What's that Chinese saying? May you have interesting time. Oh, beware of the most interesting times. We're living in a global pandemic. We're in this crazy presidential electoral process here, and the climate change, wildfires, the economic collapses. This is like, end of the world kind of stuff, huh?
Like we're in the middle of a history story, undoubtedly. Like
Yeah.
feel like I'm just stationed in this time, and everything is happening, and it's going to be, hundreds of years of discussion of this. This is what it feels like to me, and it's there's so
Mhm.
much uncertainty, and I don't know about you, but the atmosphere here, certainly with my patient populations and just everybody who I encounter, almost everybody I encounter. Some people are oblivious, but for the most part, regardless of whether you're red or blue, you got there's a lot of big feelings in the atmosphere in LA. Um, stores are boarded up, and there's just a
Oh yeah,
sense that there's
I forgot
impending
Black
doom.
Lives Matter, the riot, social justice
Yeah.
issues. Yeah.
And you can speak to, what's also cool is you can speak to people, and the narrative of their panic is so dramatically different. Like, you can speak to a person who's panicked that, the left is going to bring some sort of, rise of Hitler. And then you can speak to someone on the right, and the panic is saying, that the rise of the left can bring someone, it doesn't matter that Hitler will be the same answer point, right? They'll arrive at the same place from totally differing positions. I'm
Hmm.
terrified of Biden. I'm terrified of Trump, and I'm just
Yeah.
hearing a lot of that.
Yeah, there's the buzzword you hear is a lot of tribalism that's going on right now. There's a lot of fear of the other, and it's interesting as we are in a technological age that kind of connects us digitally. We actually are less connected with each other. We don't know our neighbors. We are isolated, and this tribalism kind of runs deep. I was listening. Some neuroscientist was talking about. I mean, that's one of the unique things of being human is that the way our brain is wired is that we always there's always an in group and there's always an out group. But I mean that's not unique to humans. You see this in the animal kingdom as well. What's unique to humans though is our ability to switch from in group. We can easily switch in group to out group. We have a lot of plasticity and flexibility in our ability to adjust who we consider the enemy and who we consider family. Isn't that interesting?
Totally. And so that means I can sort of get intoxicated on a certain vibe and just switch my whole position, right? I
Yes.
like to think of
Yes.
certain, like the atmosphere of certain rallies, right?
Yeah.
Even if they're completely different, but the charge of the atmosphere could sway my whole belief system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have instances of this throughout history, but like even in the Bible, right? It would Saul turned into Paul within a moment, right? He was persecuting the Christians and the followers of Jesus, and then he was within a second. Now he's the biggest disciple, advocating the teachings of Christ, right? Did I get that right? It's been a while since I.
You're speaking to a Jew who's not so versed in the transition
In the
of
New
Saul to
Testament.
Paul. Yeah, it's not a story I'm familiar with.
Mm.
But I know you're very studied in that. But I hear you on that, and my sense of it is I would hope for the collective, right, that it's not just an emotional, it's not just an emotional adjustment, but it's also, that I have the ability to think things through and change position.
Mm, I think thinking and emotion are tied, are connected. You know, I don't know. I don't think people are coming to these changes in group and out group through rational deliberation.
So take it to
You're too
today's
hopeful.
times, and in terms of in group and out group and who you're with. And you were talking before about isolation, right? So the only information, we're getting so much information in isolation, right?
Yeah.
What do you think what's the impact, in your opinion, on the collective when you're really, really not in the same social live environment you're in, and most of your information is coming through this technology and the media?
Could you say that again? What's your question?
What's your sense of, so you're talking about in groups and out groups. You're also, were speaking earlier about all this isolation that we've been mandated to have because of the quarantine and because of COVID, right? And in the midst of this, there's this one of the, one of the most historical elections, right, ever, right? And we're not processing it in the same way we would as if we would be together. What's your sense of the impact on the population, right, when you have to do all this in a sort of type of isolation?
Well, I mean, this is where, instead of social support, what has kind of camouflage itself as social support is social media, right? That's where people turn to their eyes on their Twitter feeds, their Facebook accounts, they're watching television, 24-hour news cycle, and that kind of informs people's take in reality, and in a way that reverses the old idea that, in 1984, George Orwell's 1984, where the government was watching you, Big Brother was always watching you. Well, we can, in our day and age, we can put that on top of its head and say, Big Brother isn't watching you. Big Brother is you watching it, and that it being social media, being the television, being all these different forms of tailored information, to suit your perception of reality.
And this was a topic of discussion long before COVID, right? So it's not a new thing, but it just seems like now it's, with the isolation that you're talking about, it seems to be way more punctuated, and that our social support, at least for the last several months, is very much informed, more so than usual, by social media and by a digital presence.
Yeah, I mean, literally, people are not gathering. They're not, for safety reasons, and that's important, right? So, social support, I think that, so you have perceived social support, right? So that's important. Like sometimes people have support, it's right there in their face and they don't see it, right? And so they're not going to necessarily benefit from it. So there is the sense that a person perception of what's going on is their perception is with their reality. Now, but there's also the social networks that we live in. We know, again, social support and these social support networks that we live in are very good indicators of how people can bounce back from stressful situations, from trauma, from disaster. And the more embedded a person is in social contacts, the more embedded and diverse their social support networks are, the better they typically do after traumatic events or stressful events or life-changing events.
So let me just back up for a second here. So one of the things that I know that you're interested in, that you've recently written on, is this discussion of perceived social support and the value of a social network. I'm just thinking about my work, and so much of it is with addiction. And one of the main focuses that we have in terms of coping as someone who has the burden of addiction is community support, right? And it's not just, go to AA because we think they have a good message, right? It's also because it's such a vast network of support. So that when you're working with addicts, right, like we're saying to them, do you have a sponsor, and are you active in that community, right? So based on what you're saying, it makes sense that is if someone could perceive a 12-step program or any other community support as a resource, then they fare better.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And that part of that community is the diversity of resources that might be available, right? So when I talk about social support comes in many different faces, right? It can be emotional support. It can be the social connection, feeling like you fit in, like you're being liked by others, feeling like you're needed or valued. It can be connected to your reassurance of your self-worth. Social support is a support to feel that can come in the form of advice and so on that you can count on when you need them. It can come in the form of information, physical assistance, and even material assistance, right? So these are all important in recovery, mental health and addiction recovery. And it is, as I was saying, that having a robust and diverse network of social support is really, really important in terms of resiliency.
I've never heard it before. This is the first time I've ever heard that. I'll throw out the word community, and I've never really unpacked it in a way which in the way that you just did, which is there are so many different levels of support, of good support, and it could be helping one feel a part of. It could be just simple, social support for mentoring. It could be access to resource, right? And it could be, access to resource, meaning helping, hey, this is what I would do to get a job, and this is what I would do if I need help. Hey, who knows? I have a big network, and as I think about this, I come from a big network of community. So when I know that I need, I'm looking for a doctor in New York, like I can think of 3 people I can call right then and there. Hey, do you know who does this? That type of support, to basic support, and being financially, hey, I need a loan.
That's what I always admired about you, Drew.
You could say it.
You, Adam, is that you had this tremendous Jewish community of social support all around the country.
Yeah, it's actually international. It's
international.
Actually an international, network of support, and only because I was exposed to different programs with people from all over the world. So, and maintained, and as I think about it, you have to, you use the word perceived, right? Help me understand that. My sense of it is that I perceived myself to be a part of a certain community. How does that? How does that work?
How does perception work?
Yes. How does perception? Because I think you implied that somebody else could have been in the same situation exactly as me and not had the same perception.
Correct. Well, we know this that high emotion, mental illness can impact our perceptions, can narrow our doors of perceptions about what is available and what's not, right? So You've heard the expression, the glass is half full and half empty, right? And so if someone that's always perceiving and always perceiving slights from other people, that's paranoid, that thinks that the system's rigged or that people are out to get them, they might not perceive that support with another person that, let's say, has a more optimistic view on the world.
Interesting. So I'm thinking, Adam, psychologist, part of what I'm doing is helping people develop the skills needed to access support. So if I think of the work in recovery, right, so much of the work is I got a person coming in who's not so motivated and has a whole litany of complaints and attacks against the world of the community support. They're like this. I'm not like them. They believe in spirituality, or they don't believe in spirituality, or I'm no more than them about God, or whatever it is. It's my part of my work is helping them to, make adjustments so they can be more amenable to the support.
Yeah. We were talking about individual therapy and counseling and all that.
I am.
Yeah, it helps. It's for some people, not everybody receives help from therapy. Maybe at 1 in 3 people, maybe sometimes that's better than our flu shots, but it's not bad. But my whole point is that in the research that I've done is that social support in itself, that there are many roads to the mountaintop. There are many paths to wellness and recovery. And therapy is definitely a good path. But sometimes to get people to that therapy or sometimes what therapy does is kind of helps open up those other doors where social connection and support can happen. And therapy is sometimes a last resort when all those social support doors have been closed in people's lives.
Wow, you said a lot there, right? And
yeah, let's unpack it.
Yeah, you said a lot there, and I didn't hear it as an indictment on the field. I started to, and then I like you said before, I switched so easily. I started to hear like, hey, it's not that effective. It's a little effective. But then I heard you say, and for some people, it may be the last resort to help repair and help people work towards accessing a social network, right? So if I have some of the obstacles to accessing a social network, potentially therapy can be a good space to rebuild and help somebody to access support. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, let me give you an example. In my paper, The Impact of Perceived Social Support on Mental Health, Quality of Life, and Disability in Post-9/11 U.S. Military Veterans,
Can you say that one more
was
time?
published in May 15th in Armed Forces and Society.
Hold on one second. Read that title again, because it says so much.
Impact of Perceived Social Support on Mental Health, Quality of Life, and Disability in Post-9/11 U.S. Military Veterans.
Interesting. Okay.
Published in this May 2020 in Armed Forces and Society. I looked at, let's see, it was maybe about 140 combat veterans that had been through war and have come back. And the idea was we were going to follow them over a 3-year period and kind of assess them at 3-month intervals. Unfortunately, the primary investigator of the study had left the study earlier. So my research, this paper was the first phase of this, where we got a sense of we got measures on people's mental health conditions and disability and quality of life, and also their perceived social support and their social network density, and their substance use as well. And what we found was that veterans that had higher social support had lower symptoms of PTSD, major depression, anxiety. Substance abuse was not connected. And they also had less disability and a better quality of life across the board. Now, the challenge and limitation of the study is it was a single point assessment and a cohort evaluation that is not, we could just talk about correlations and not understanding, like, is this a chicken or egg, right? And that was a big debate in the field around, well, people with PTSD, maybe they, over time, the PTSD symptoms pushes them away from people. Mm-hmm. Their irritability, their anger, their aggression, their desire to avoid and be isolated. So their social support will diminish over time. And then, so that's the one side of the field. And the other side of the field is saying, no, people with social support, they don't. So even in my study, people that were diagnosed and evaluated for PTSD, the ones that had higher social support had reported a better quality of life, less disability, and they had less of avoidance symptoms of PTSD.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So one of the things, so it's funny because I just saw yesterday that there was a research that came out that followed people that were victims of violence over 8 years. And they did identify that social support was a really predictor. People that had social support on the front end, that predicted social support later, but also predicted who developed PTSD and who didn't, being those with higher social support did not develop PTSD. But I was curious in myself in my own study, because I had known a bunch of people in the study, because some of them were my patients or people that I recruited. And I looked up one guy I know in particular. And another thing I should say is that's really important to this, that no one had really asked this question in the study, was before my study, was I'm in an urban hospital. Predominantly, we have African American, Latino veterans. They make up one third Latino, 1/3 African American, and 1/3 white and other. And in my study, we had exactly this proportion of people, and which was unique, because in no other study, that typically when they study veterans, they only study white veterans.
Interesting.
And what we discovered, the question was, does it make a difference? Does race and ethnicity make a difference with regard to social support? And there was some studies that noted that during deployments and after deployments, Latinos and African American veterans actually had more conflict, more family disruptions, more psychosocial distress and disruption after they came back from their deployments and during their deployments. However, the good thing that we found is unlike psychotherapy that you're talking about, or the what the VA would call evidence-based treatments, that these so-called treatments that are for PTSD that are supposed to be so effective, they're not effective for everyone. There is some research that suggests that African Americans do not respond as well to these treatments as the veterans that they were initially tested on were these white veterans. And but with regard to social support, guess what? There is no differences. That everyone responds to that alike, which, you know, is I'm reminded of William James, the great American psychologist who founded the first psychology laboratory in Harvard in 1879 or something like that. And he said, you know, he was a psychologist first, and then and a philosopher, and later became disillusioned with psychology. He said that psychology was no more than the senseless elaboration of the obvious. But which I always like that quote.
Right.
But the idea here is that everyone can receive social support. Social support can be helpful for everyone. Social support is what helps people move through challenging times.
So hold on a second. So you made it that this is very interesting. I don't mind the critical of the field thing you're doing. I don't hear the subtle, you know, knocking of evidence-based and all that sort of the undertone, you know, which is, you know,
that newspeak.
Yeah,
that we're well
I can work with what you're talking about. But you said it early on that while the African American and Latino population had some family conflict, right? That there was an increase in family conflict post deployment. The ultimate idea that social support or perceived social support is equally good across the board despite conflict. Is that
That's right?
Despite conflict and struggle, which is anticipated, meaning stating the obvious. I come back from a deployment. I've been beat up and seen terrible things. I'm going to have struggle, but ultimately social support, more so than psychotherapy, which is not necessarily, we can't necessarily demonstrate efficacy, but social support has efficacy across the board.
Well, we can demonstrate efficacy in psychotherapy, but
not across the board.
I'm saying,
right.
Well, you know, I would even take issue, right? You talk about evidence-based, you just said evidence-based therapy, or that I poked at it. And it's like this whole idea of evidence-based therapy based on the random clinical RCT, random clinical trial, really you pick out the subjects that you're going to participate in the study. They go through a very limited go through an intervention, and they're followed for a very limited time. So it's like, you know, when you study floss in this format, floss doesn't show any efficacy for using floss in the short term.
What's floss?
Right? But floss, dental floss.
Oh, dental floss. I'm like, is that some researcher I've never heard of? I do floss, by the way. I floss every day. I swear to God, I do floss.
That's right.
Yes.
So from an epidemiological standpoint, we know that people that floss have better health and over the long haul, right? But it's hard to prove it in the type of the research design that we use to study psychotherapy. And I would suggest that I think that the same with psychotherapy, that not everyone responds in the same way, and that this whole idea of evidence-based psychotherapy ignores 50 years of research that says it's the relationship that's most important. So instead of talking about a protocol, or like, we're going to do this in symptom way, you know, we're going to do this list of things today and follow it this way. I think it's more important to think about evidence-based providers, right? Not the protocol, because the protocol or a manual in two different psychologists' hands, the same manual might produce different results, because it depends on the person and the relationship. And that's what evidence-based treatments kind of ignore, how important the relationship is. And that's what social support is all about.
So there's a connection between the efficacy, you're drawing a connection between the efficacy of therapy in the relationship and the efficacy of social support in the relationship. That relationships, or perceived relationships, are an essential of healing.
Yes.
Right. And
yeah.
I like what you're talking about, stating the obvious. It's kind of, but you unpack it in a very thoughtful way. It's not just the obvious. It's involved.
Yeah.
There are different types of supports, but you're pro community and you're pro connection, right?
Yeah.
So I hear somebody who's saying, "Hey, if I'm looking at a kid in development without any issues, right? The value of a social network is so important."
That's right. So, so I would differ from William James. He says it's a senseless elaboration. I think that it's the art of elaborating the obvious. That's what makes us unique. That's what we can offer.
So, yeah, and I'm just thinking about sort of bringing it back. What an important finding. Number one. Also, like, I like that I like talking to people who are willing to say there are other answers that aren't just in the room of therapy, but that are crucial for healing and support, that aren't psychotherapy. And I'm hearing you say, yes, you're gonna fare better if you have a good sense that you have people in your world who have your back, and no matter who you are. And in this, I just want to talk about it in terms of what's going on now in the world with the type of isolation and the a primary relationship being digital, right? How do we speak to the needs of, because both of us agree, I'm sure, that there's, we were talking earlier, we're very, very busy in our work because there's so much more need for mental health support right now. These have been, while some people have I sympathize with people, they haven't had work. I've had the opposite. This has been some of the busiest times for me, and you were saying that too. How does your study, in your opinion, relate to, what's going on since March, and with all the stress of the economy and the the what we were talking about earlier, just the collective panic, regardless of what camp you're in?
I don't know that my study relates to what's going on here, other than we know that people that do well during stressful times, during economic downturns, during traumatic events, respond better when they're in a community, when they perceive the social support, when they're getting that help, and that's one of the great things about being in the VA, is there are so many programs that are available to provide these sources that is missing in our community.
Man, and when I can't access community, due to the law and the limitations, and the weather, right? Like, we're in LA. I take it for granted that we can meet people outside. This really, really could be fracturing to people who have pre-existing social networks that are strong.
That's right. As I'm in Chicago, today's a beautiful day, but we're looking into going into the winter, and they have closed down. You can't go into restaurants, right? Only outdoor stuff. And so that is a barrier, an obstacle to a community. I was saying before that, people have tried to, and they are using Zoom and technology to connect with family. And I think some of my colleagues tried to like a Zoom happy hour in the beginning of the pandemic, which, was all right, but it's not the same.
Mm-mm.
It's different. It's shorter, it's more time limited. But I think you have to be creative to find ways to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And in this epidemic, during this epidemic, I have connected to old friends I haven't talked to in a while, and made some trips out west to go camping in nature, away from people. Nature is another good valued resource
For sure.
for coping. But
we had a bonding moment during COVID, you and I, where we both like needed to identify that we're friends and reassert that. I don't know if you remember that, because we both were like needing that. And
That's
yes, just like I need to know, and for me it was like I need to know I have a network, and I've been needing to reassert that I have people in my life, and it's sort of instinctual. And I guess it really makes sense of your research. And just to clarify, in your findings about the value of social support on the mental health conditions, what specific mental health conditions fared better with social support or pre-existing social support network, perceived social support network?
Yeah, well, that was the surprising thing, because in the study, we most of the research out there, that there's some that looked at depression, and PTSD, but we found that social support benefited all of the mental health conditions, right? So we looked at major depression, we looked at anxiety disorders, we looked at PTSD, we also looked at quality of life and disability. So that was really cool, that it's a very robust kind of and general impact, on everything, mental health.
So my takeaway.
However, I know you're in the substance abuse field. It was a more complicated relationship there, because we know that. So that was the only condition that it didn't necessarily benefit, right?
So I would look at it this way:
social support, actually, and you're in a network that uses drugs and alcohol heavily, that can negatively impact your alcohol and drug use. That kind of makes sense, right?
So, just to qualify that, I think that for substance use, perceived social support could be other people I get high with, and that may be complicated. Versus, I would say there is, in that category, I mean it, quote unquote, the right type of social support is more of a healthy, sober network versus a drug network. People who you get high with. That's just a thought of why that particular issue may be a little more complicated. But in general, my takeaway from this, regardless, and I'll say, like, both as a practitioner now, I heard a lot of things. One is, I'm not the only game in town, right? That's my takeaway. I'm not the only game in town. Be humble, right? Be humble. Yeah. There's benefits, and some people may respond better to benefits that aren't in the room of psychotherapy. Number one. Number two is, if I do have someone who's struggling with a perceived sense of social support, help them, and make it a priority in the work to help someone who's needing to build resources, that's a critical resource. I definitely believe that. And the third thing I would say during this very difficult time is get creative. Like you said, get creative. And if Zoom is all we got, then Zoom's all we got. But let's get creative and find ways to access the network, because it's so important to resiliency and mental health that it's not just about the relationship with me in the room. It's also about how do I access a broader network. So very, very thoughtful, very thoughtful research. If I just want to just end with this. First of all, thank you. And second of all, if people have questions or just want to ask you about your study, what's the best way to contact you? And don't worry, nobody's going to flood you.
Eric.Proescher, Proescher, 2 at va.gov.
Beautiful. Dr. Proescher, as always, thank you so much. I love the way you do information. I love the way you think and challenge things and are open to just looking at things through a different lens. And my hope is that we can do more of these.
Most definitely. I'd love to do that.
All right, Dr. P. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.
This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there's an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.